Welcome into the Oklahoman's video studio for a late Thursday edition of the Week in Review. I'm Dave Morris, joined by my colleagues from the newsroom, Justin Wingerter, Ryan Sharp, and Adam Wilmoth. Gentlemen, thank you for your time.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks to Paige Dillard in the booth for producing, manning the ones and twos back there. Justin, I'll start with you. You cover the congressional side of politics here for us. Specifically this week, the 5th Congressional District between challenger Democrat Kendra Horn and incumbent Representative Republican Steve Russell. They had a debate Wednesday night. What did you see from that?
Yeah, it was a raucous debate. About 250 people crammed into City Presbyterian, and the crowd was very loud. The crowd was very pro-Horn, and they were not shy about who they supported and how. They really inserted themselves into the debate. I've not really seen a debate crowd quite like that. They yelled things at Russell. They yelled their own questions, and they had to be. One person had to be removed. A couple people were threatened with removal from a police officer. So
really,
it was a wild debate. Yeah.
By the way, you can follow Justin's coverage every day in the Oklahoma as we lead up to the general election early November, as well as online at newsok.com. But let's dive back into this last night. I've attended a few debates this political season, and you can tell when the crowd is okay, the candidate has more of the crowd than the other candidate does. But last night, that sounds fairly divisive.
It was very divisive, and the candidates themselves were not as divisive. Horn did have a few shots that she took at the congressman, as she has on the campaign trail, and those mostly focus on health care and taxes, which taxes are something Russell really sees as a strength after the tax cut bill passed last year. But Horn goes after him argues that those tax cuts are too favorable to the rich. They don't help the average Oklahoman enough. And she tries to link him, as she has for about a year now, to Mary Fallin and to the state's problems. Even though she's running for a federal office, she likes to hone in on education and health care, and specifically Oklahoma's problems with those two issues. So that was an interesting thing she did again last night, specifically trying to link tax cuts at the federal level, which passed last year from Republicans, to tax cuts we had in the state, which Horn would argue brought about problems with the education funding specifically.
How did the congressman handle the crowd last night?
He got a little unnerved. I think it's not someone who debates very often. It's not someone who does a lot of public forums like that very often. He mostly stuck to his notes. He read from his notes, which helped him, I think. But there were a couple of times where he did seem to get thrown off by the crowd. I mean, there were times where I could not hear some of the answers. There were times where he would begin to speak and he would be almost shouted down by the crowd, where he had to raise his voice. It was an unusual setting, and so that threw him off a little bit there. For the most part, I think he took it pretty well, and he was trying to make some points about how we need to be more civil. And during that discussion, the crowd itself was shouting questions at him, shouting at him to answer the question, and he's kind of turned it around and said, "This is what I'm talking about. We don't talk civilly to each other. We're shouting things." And so he kind of turned it back on the crowd a little bit and helped him make his point on that issue. But it was a different night, an interesting night.
General election in Oklahoma and across the nation, November 6th for the midterm race. Let's talk about this race where it stands. Kendra Horn has done well in fundraising leading into this. What are you hearing as far as who's ahead?
She's raised more money than Russell, which is unusual. She's a Democratic challenger running for the first time in a Republican district. So that is noteworthy that she's been able to out-fundraise him. She has a good ground game. She's hit a lot of volunteers. She's on TV. She had an attack ad last week, like I mentioned, linking Russell to Fallin. She's probably down at this point, and the polls have not been great. We've had some internal polls from Russell, which show him up by probably 10 or 15. The one independent poll has had him up by 10 a couple weeks ago. It might be down in the single digits. I think by any stretch, she's losing at this point, but she just hopes to get within a few points, and then on election night, you get the enthusiasm. The Democratic enthusiasm nationwide is pretty strong right now, so she's hoping a lot of people turn out that typically don't turn out, and maybe people who aren't being polled right now.
Again, general election, November 6th. This gentleman will be following all sorts of races that night, including this in Congressional District number 5 here in Oklahoma. Good job covering all that. Speaking of jobs, that was referenced in the debate last night. We'll turn to Adam Wilmoth, the business editor. Jack Money's been working on a jobs report. A lot of people think, hey, Oklahoma, it's chock full of people in the energy industry. Well, he's breaking down kind of the percentages of where people are working in this state.
That's right. He's looking at how many jobs are in each sector, looking particularly at the energy sector. I'm going to put you guys on the spot. Let me just throw this out to y'all. Take a guess.
Hope we've studied up, guys.
Yes. Where would you think? What percentage would you say of Oklahoma's economy, Oklahoma's jobs, are in the energy industry?
As Paige cues up the Jeopardy
30%.
I was going to say 25.
You know, I would think it'd be a large percentage too, but you got to think that state employees are probably the biggest, and then government after that. But then third, energy's got to be a huge industry.
You would think, and it might be, but the actual numbers from the State Labor Commission, 55,600 jobs in September, which is 3% of the state.
Oh, way over.
Now that's the mining sector. There are some caveats here. That's the mining sector that does not include transportation, and there's a lot of transportation jobs in Oklahoma that are energy related, hauling water, hauling sand. That also does not include manufacturing. A lot of manufacturing in Oklahoma goes to valves and pipes, but still 3% is a much smaller number than I would have expected, and I cover this industry, so it was a surprise to me, a surprise to Jack, and so he's looking at that and looking at some comparisons, historical comparisons. First year these records were kept was 1939. That was right before World War II. That was right as the Oklahoma City field was really picking up. And in that year, 38,000 jobs were in the energy sector, which is about 12% of the state economy. The peak jobs was in 1982, probably no surprise there, 118,000 jobs. But at that time, that was only 9% of the state economy. So it's interesting that part of the economy drives so much of the state, but it really represents a fairly small percentage of jobs in the state.
Well, and that takes us to another story that we were reporting this week of yet another industry emerging in Oklahoma, and that's a big industry or a big company in Amazon.
That's exactly right. Amazon has a couple of big projects going on in Oklahoma. They have a delivery center up on Hefner Road that is picking up. It's got 460 jobs going up there. There are also an interesting story that David Dishman had for us earlier this week. They are partnering with some local entrepreneurs, local companies who are driving the last mile. That's kind of been their last challenge.
Literally, they're driving the product.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're picking it up from the delivery center and taking it to homes. And the plan is probably early next year when they get everything going. But the plan is that they'll be able to have these Oklahoma entrepreneurs picking up the product, taking it the last mile, and their goal is to eventually get same-day delivery. And they might see some of that early next year, particularly after they finish the fulfillment center, which is the 640,000 square foot facility that's under construction over by the airport.
So they would have just enough local inventory for just-in-time delivery that they would be able to fulfill these orders really quickly.
That's the goal, is that they're hoping to be able to get probably not everything, but a lot of your orders, a lot of the common typical orders would be delivered within the same day.
That's what I was about to ask. And perhaps we've reported this and I just missed it, but I wonder if Amazon has any stats of what Oklahomans typically order.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, the top 10 list for Oklahomans on Amazon.
That would be interesting.
Stay tuned for that. All right, good stuff. More business coverage, of course, can be found every day in the Oklahoman. You mentioned those stories by Jack Money and David Dishman, and also online at newsok.com. And as we head into the weekend, OU and OSU, we'll start there. Both have some pretty big games. OU at Kansas State in the afternoon. That night, Oklahoma State takes on Texas. It's homecoming weekend.
Yeah, they're actually both here. OU's at home. Both of them it's homecoming week for both schools.
I said two things, didn't I? I said at Kansas State and then
at home. Yeah.
But you are correct. They are here in the state.
Two different experiences with homecoming at OU and OSU. OSU blows theirs out of the water. They have the big walk-arounds on Friday night. They have the parade Saturday morning. A little bit bigger fanfare in Stillwater.
It's well done.
It is. OU has a parade too. They have a lot of stuff going on in Norman. But the games are interesting. OU've got the second game with their newish defense under Ruff and McNeil, same players and most of the same coaches. And OSU is hosting a top 10 team in Texas who Everybody wants to talk about Texas and has for several years, whether or not they're back. They are in the top 10. Their only loss coming at the beginning of the year to Maryland. They're playing really good football, which is good for the Big 12. It's hard for folks around here to see that and to admit it, but they know it is too. When Texas is strong, it makes the Big 12 stronger. Texas being good could help OU down the road eventually when you start talking about college football playoff. Obviously, if Texas gets in, it's good for the Big 12. So you've got them in Stillwater, so that should be an interesting game. OSU's kind of on a little bit of a slide here. A whole bunch of questions at quarterback, your defense, all kinds of issues here and there. And like I said, again, Texas is playing really good football.
Well, and as I mentioned, this is the Thursday evening edition of the Weekend Review, and Thursday night, the Thunder back in action just down the street at Chesapeake Energy Arena against the Boston Celtics. Yeah,
who, by all accounts, are the favorites to come out of the East and make the NBA Finals. And if you look at their roster kind of up and down, they've got a lot of really talented players, young and some veterans. They're an interesting team. You've got guys coming off injury. Folks around here are really familiar with Marcus Smart, who plays well for them. It'll be a challenge for the Thunder, who, I mean, they've started 0-3. Each game has been a little bit of a different issue. Some of the same things crop up from time to time. Their biggest issue right now is shooting. And so,
speaking of stats, you know, Adam was talking about the oil field industry stats. Your crew broke down some stats.
Yeah, so Eric Horn in Thursday's paper had just the second half of his section was just full of these crazy stats that you can follow with NBA analytics. Two of them that I actually wrote down that are super interesting is the Thunder ranks number 5 in potential assists, which if you think about that, potential assists. So I pass you the ball and you have an open shot, whether you make it or not, that's a potential assist, as long as you shoot the ball before you dribble more than once. The other one is they're number 1 in wide open threes. So they're getting open shots and they're taking open shots. They're just not making open shots, which there's all kinds of reasons for that. This team has not been and probably will not be just a phenomenal shooting team. And the best shooter that they have is a guy that has been on and off the bench because of injuries, and Alex Abrinas. Abrinas got elbowed in the face by his own teammate the last time out. Kind of was in and out of practice this week. He's expected to play tonight against Boston, so that would help him out a little bit. The other guys that are kind of in the mix there, Terrence Ferguson has really struggled the first 3 games this year. You know, he struggled in the summer league too, so I don't know if this is a carryover from that. But he's starting, so he's getting starters minutes, but his shot's off. He looks a little lost on defense. He's just almost panicked a little bit. But then they've got a young guy in Hamidou Diallo who is starting to kind of take some of Ferguson's minutes. So you've got Abrinas' health, Ferguson's confidence, and Diallo's minutes. All questions. Meanwhile, you've got your best player on your team who's just played 1 game. So they're trying to figure out how he works with some of these new pieces. There's a lot of moving parts. So I don't think it's quite time to panic with the Thunder. I think they're going to get some stuff figured out, especially if they get Robertson back towards the end of the season. But not time to panic, just an interesting time to kind of follow and watch kind of how these guys evolve.
Two the best teams in the league, or expected to be the best teams in the league, the Thunder and Celtics tonight. Neither off to great starts of the season. We'll have complete coverage online at newsok.com throughout the night via social media and, of course, online in the Thunder Buddies podcast and all that sort of stuff, and in tomorrow's editions of the Oklahoman. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Paige, good job producing back here in the booth. These stories and more in upcoming editions of the Oklahoman and, of course, online at newsok.com. Have a great weekend, everyone.